Mr. Nanshi, let me welcome you to this Channel Punjabi program here today.
Thank you, Sat Shri Akal, and thank you to all the viewers for tuning in. I'm so excited to be here.
And we also have with us Mr. Sukhdev Singh Aujla.
Great to see you.
Nice to meet you.
And we are happy that you could find time to be with us. And we would like to speak mostly things that are of current interest nature.
Sure.
And affecting Alberta in one way or the other. Now, the hottest topic, as anybody who is engaged in the public processes, is these days what is happening, what Mr. Trump is giving us for the day, flavor of the day.
Yeah, it changes every day.
Exactly. And, I'd like to get your reaction as to how do you think that Alberta is responding or reacting to the challenges being thrown at us from the White House down south?
Terrific. Well, if you don't mind, let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
Give you a little bit of context of kind of where we are in Alberta right now, which is we've had a really interesting session of the legislature, which is finished now. The legislature will not sit again until the fall.
Okay.
But in this session, there's been a lot of politics.
Yes.
The premier has now lost, she has a majority of 6 seats, and she's now lost 2. Because one of her cabinet colleagues stepped away, he resigned from cabinet and then was kicked out of the caucus on this scandal, this healthcare scandal that's going on right now. The other stepped away, was kicked out of caucus as well because he couldn't support the budget, because he felt that the government was spending way too much money and not on things that people are interested in. But all of this has been in the backdrop, of course, as all politics have been, of what's going on in the U.S. in the months since President Trump was elected. Now, Premier Smith has taken a different tack than everyone else. So, whereas most other people are kind of taking this Team Canada approach, let's work together, Premier Smith has sort of been out on her own. And she went to visit Mr. Trump in Florida, and I was actually like, well, good for her for getting a meeting with him. But it was a 10-second meeting in which she got nothing accomplished, and who knows how much taxpayer money she spent. She has been spending her time courting Republicans and right-wing people in the U.S. She even spent taxpayer money to go to Florida to raise money for a right-wing organization that is very, very right-wing, anti-immigration. They've questioned the history of slavery in the U.S., and she raised $1.5 million for them. So this is her strategy, but I'm not sure it's working.
Nancy, is it not good that she is going into enemy territory trying to find out what makes them tick? What are they thinking?
If she were actually trying to make them figure that out, I'd give her a lot of credit. If she were effective in her conversations, I'd give her a lot of credit. But she hasn't been. She hasn't won any victories here. She just makes the rest of Canada look weak and look divided. And if they think about her at all, they use her as a negotiating leverage for themselves to say, look, not all Canadians feel the way the Prime Minister does. Not all Canadians feel the way Doug Ford does. And this is really my challenge. She fundamentally thought that if she could get 10 seconds with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, that she would convince him that his entire economic policies are wrong. And I think the moment that we can probably look back on and realize what a problem we've got here is when Trump announced his tariff plan, what he called Liberation Day in April. She tweeted that this was a big win for Canada and Alberta.
Is that right?
She really did. And it's not a big win. Unemployment is growing in Alberta. Wage growth is falling behind the rest of the country. Inflation is rising. And if we end up having broader tariffs, and President Trump can change his mind any moment, right? As we're filming this, he just decided to go on steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%.
Her main focus has been on energy, oil and gas.
Yes.
And such. And, for Mr. Trump has not announced any punitive tariffs on Alberta's oil and gas. So shouldn't he be applauding her win in that area?
Not her win. Nothing to do with her. What actually happened was that one refinery in the United States, which, believe it or not, we only have really one client for Alberta Oil, which is the U.S. But what most people don't know is there's only one company Marathon Oil, which takes 60 to 80% of all Canadian oil exports. One company, if you can believe it. And the CEO of that company earlier this spring said to his shareholders, we just need a little more time to retool our factories so that they don't need Canadian oil anymore.
Okay.
So at best, we've received a delay from President. We haven't actually received a win. And I would argue that the win will come when we renegotiate the free trade agreement with the U.S. But we have to finish renegotiating that free trade agreement from a position of strength. And my argument is that Premier Smith could have been very useful, right? She could have been very useful as kind of, as you say, the one who could go behind the enemy lines. But she's not doing it with Canada in mind. She's not doing it with an end in mind. And in fact, she fights with the Prime Minister much more than she fights with the President about domestic issues. And I believe that this is not helpful. So I'll give you a quick example. When Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, at the beginning of the tariffs said, if you do this to Ontario electricity, we're going to cut off the electricity.
Yes.
The same day, he got a phone call from the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and he was invited to conversations in Washington, D.C. Danielle Smith, Howard Lutnick has no idea who Danielle Smith is, because all she's done is shown our soft side. We'll do whatever you want. Even today, as we're recording this, she has an op-ed in the Washington Times, which is a right-wing newspaper in Washington, making the case for Alberta. And that's good. It's good that she's doing that. But when you read it, it doesn't make the critical case, which is that if Alberta energy exports to the U.S. are tariffed or stopped, the price of gasoline in the U.S. will rise incredibly high. She doesn't make that argument because that's not an argument she can make because she wants to take Donald Trump's side.
Mr. Ojla?
Mr. Nanshi, you think Mr. Carney, our Prime Minister, is heading our country in the right direction?
Well, he's been there for all of 3 weeks, so it's a little early, I think, to make an assessment. But here's the thing. Because of my life as mayor when I was nonpartisan and meeting with everybody, I kind of know everybody. And I've actually known Mr. Carney for many years.
Okay.
And so I have managed, I hope to be in Ottawa maybe when this is airing. I have some meetings in Ottawa and I'm hoping to sit down with the Prime Minister again. But I had the chance to sit down with him in Edmonton when he was here. And I think it's fair to say that in a 15-minute meeting with the Prime Minister, I probably was able to advance certain key files for Alberta more than Danielle's been able to do in 2 years. Because sometimes you gotta talk to people.
Right.
And here's what I believe about the Prime Minister. I believe he is exactly as advertised. He's very, very, very smart. He's not traditionally a politician. He's a policy wonk. So he wants to get the right policy answer as opposed to the right political answer. But I think the idea is, regardless of who you have in power, you have to figure out what makes them tick. And then you've got to figure out how to make the arguments that work for them.
Yes.
So I've jokingly been saying that Donald Trump wrote a book in the 1980s called The Art of the Deal, all about negotiating. And I want to buy a copy for Danielle Smith so that when she's going into these negotiations, she knows what makes him tick. But I think with the Prime Minister, I suspect this is a man you can make a deal with.
Okay.
And when we saw the premiers, all of them, meeting with the Prime Minister earlier this week, and he was dropping hints about a grand bargain.
You're right.
And Danielle Smith picked up the language of the grand bargain, but it's not clear to me she understood what the grand bargain is. And the grand bargain is actually something I think we could really think about as a long-term future for Alberta. And it is that if the provincial government comes on board with the federal government to fund certain projects to bring down the carbon emissions of the oil industry, and in particular, a project called Pathways, which buries the carbon underground. It's very expensive. And people have been reluctant, even the provincial government has been reluctant to come to the table with the money. But if we can fund the Pathways project, the Prime Minister is signaling that he would be in favor of allowing one more export pipeline for oil and gas. Take the deal. It's a good deal. But I think the challenge is that what the Premier is having trouble understanding is you can't snap your fingers and build a pipeline. You actually, first of all, you need a private sector proponent willing to build it.
Right.
And in the last 6 years under UCP, we have not had a single person come forward and say they want to build a pipeline. We've not advanced 1 meter of pipeline. The only export pipeline that has ever been built in the last 40 years in Canada was built when the NDP was in power here in Alberta, and the federal government. And the mayor of Calgary, if I may say so, had a little bit to do with that.
Sure.
But I think because she actually said something very troubling this week. She said, if you can create a regulatory process that guarantees the answer yes, within 2 years, people might want to come and put their capital down and build a pipeline. There's no regulatory process that guarantees a yes. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a process.
Can you put that in simple terms as to
Oh,
what
I'm
is
trying. I'm a bit of an
regulatory
economist,
process?
so I'm trying.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. In order to get a pipeline built,
Yes.
you need 4 parties.
Okay.
You need the federal government to make the regulatory process easy. You need the provincial government to do to help Indigenous consultation and environmental assessment
Right.
that won't be thrown out by the courts, because the courts ultimately have a say here. You need a private company that wants to build it,
Right.
that wants to put down the money, and you need customers who are willing to buy the oil. And you kind of have to work on all 4 of those things together. And the challenge is that Alberta, and under Premier Smith and under Premier Kenney, but also versus Prime Minister Carney, Prime Minister Trudeau, and Prime Minister Harper, have just been focused on getting Ottawa to agree. But the other 2 are equally important. And you'll recall, if you've been following the news, there was a pipeline called Northern Gateway,
Yes.
and which was going to go to the northwest coast of British Columbia, to a place called Kitimat.
Kitimat, yeah.
And the Premier always says Trudeau canceled that pipeline. Trudeau did not cancel that pipeline. The Supreme Court threw it out because they said the Harper government hadn't done proper consultation with Indigenous people.
Right.
So regardless of whether the Premier can get Mark Carney on side, she also has to help create the process to make sure the courts won't throw it out. And she's shown no interest or desire to do that.
So, in other words, there is an opportunity here for the Premier of Alberta to bring all those four things together and move the project forward.
Exactly.
And in your view, if I'm hearing you right, the Premier of Alberta has been lacking in their diligence to make that happen.
She likes to fight. Sort of her deal is she wants to fight with everybody. She doesn't seem to like to win. And in my world, I just want to sign deals. I want to win. I want to get things done. But one of the criticisms that folks have had of the Premier is that if she doesn't have someone to fight with, she doesn't have anything else to do.
Okay.
And so when we think about other things that matter to people, healthcare, education, the economy, the cost of living, one of the surprising things about this government, for me, because I've been a politician now for 15 years, I was mayor of Calgary for 11, but I've been a student of politics my whole life. You know, I wrote columns, I did a lot of political analysis and so on when I was a professor. And I've never seen a government that is so uninterested in the details of governing. You know, so they'll fight all the time with doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, but they're not actually building healthcare facilities. You know, the South Edmonton Hospital here was promised by the UCP in 2023, then it was canceled. And the Premier actually said, well, we're building a hospital in Red Deer, so the people of South Edmonton can just travel to Red Deer. That's pretty far. And so what I'm concerned about is that this government, unlike any other government I've ever seen, is interested in distracting from the issues instead of doing things on the
But don't
issues.
most politicians do that? Isn't Mr. Trump doing the same thing?
No, well, he's like, love or hate Mr. Trump, he's getting stuff done. You know, he has passed so many executive orders, far more than any other president ever
Are
has.
they not all disruptive? Or they're not
Oh,
all
they're
disruptive?
terribly disruptive.
Then that
But-
cannot be told that it is achieving things or getting things done.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you think an achievement is, right? If you want to deport immigrants from the U.S.,
Most
he's deporting a lot.
Most politicians are only interested in getting into power, and then once they are in power, in staying in power.
I actually disagree with that. I've been watching politics for a really long time.
I'm sure you have been.
And so let me tell you that I would say most politicians, left or right, are actually doing politics, even if I disagree with them, they're doing politics because they believe in seva. There are easier ways to make money. There are easier ways to get power. I really believe it. But I will tell you something. And when you're the mayor, when there's no political parties, you know, look, there's no power in being a city councillor. And it's a lot of hard work. And we attract people who want to do that job because they want to do that job. And my experience has been in speaking with politicians across the spectrum, left, right, young, old, the vast majority are doing this for seva. I will, however, tell you that the world has changed in the last 5-7 years.
Okay.
And I'm starting to see more of what you're describing.
Okay.
And in particular, I think Mr. Trump's administration, I don't know. Because do you take him at face value that he really believes that the entire economic system is wrong? And if he does all this hugely disruptive stuff with tariffs, it will bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and it will build better jobs in the U.S. Every economist says it's wrong.
He must be
but he
having
might
a
believe
magic
it.
wand that we can't see.
Well, look, every economist in the
understand.
world says it's wrong.
Okay.
But you know, you can give him the benefit of the doubt. But what I really am seeing is that you're starting to get more and more people now who I don't understand why they're in politics. And I hate to say it, but it is the case with our current provincial government. You know, Jason Kenney and I, for example, when I was mayor and he was premier, we disagreed on a lot of things. But I never doubted that Jason Kenney was trying to do what he thought was the right thing.
See,
With Danielle Smith, I can't say the same.
You know, there is a skill and there's an art and there is science behind having your idea and making your opponent take ownership of that particular idea and then claim a win. That yes, I'm doing it. It's my idea.
Very much, yeah.
So, so that's an art and a skill that you know, unfortunately, not many people seem to display very strong, good position in. However, coming back here to our situation as such, what is happening in what Mr. Trump does in the White House or elsewhere, we cannot control that. How do you think the government of Canada is responding to that? Is that
great
response
question.
reasonable, or do you think it could be better, and how?
I think they're doing okay. But we have put out a platform of how to deal with the Trump threats. And it has 5 elements to it. So the first element is, and none of this is rocket science, but you have to kind of do all 5 things at once. So the first element is to build a stronger internal economy in Canada. We're not a huge country, but we are a 40 million person country. And we've been talking about reducing interprovincial trade barriers and things like that for a long time. But there's been very little action on it. So for example, you know, I know a lot of people in the Punjabi community are engaged in the transport business.
Yes.
And we've really seen that in the transport business, there's all kinds of different regulations and rules that make it difficult for someone to take a truck across provincial barriers and so on. You know, there's even cases where I've heard where people get to the Alberta, British Columbia barrier and then switch the load from one truck to another truck. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And so working on these things is important. And I will argue that the 2 most important provincial trade barriers are ones that I think a lot of your listeners would be interested in. One of them is accreditation of professionals and ensuring that we have a national program, particularly for internationally trained graduates. But number 2 is building codes. It's actually very hard for builders to build across provinces. So these are areas that we need to build a stronger Canadian economy. And I'm going to go on and on. That's just 1 out of 5. Number 2, we need a more strategic relationship with the U.S. We can't be scared to show them our teeth like Doug Ford does, but we need to build a relationship with our largest customer, the U.S., that is based partly on common respect, but that is also based on what we can do strategically, and that means both to help them, but also to hurt them. And we need to be much more thoughtful on that. I think Mr. Carney's got that one down. I think he's kind of figured that out, but he needs the premiers to come with him. Number 3, we need to build much larger global markets. So, you know, the only pipeline that's been built, I mentioned earlier, is the Trans Mountain pipeline to Vancouver, Burnaby. And that particular pipeline is now exporting 80% of its oil to Asia. Just before COVID, I went to India for the first time in my life, literally as COVID was hitting. And I can tell you all about my trip to India. It was very interesting. But on a trade mission. And as a result of that trade mission, once the pandemic eased, we actually got 3 of the 5 largest Indian IT companies to set up their Canadian headquarters in Alberta.
Oh, wonderful. That's great.
And so
Great news.
doing that sort of outbound work is really important. Number 4, we have to look after people who are getting hurt by the tariffs. Businesses are closing, people are losing their jobs, and we don't have any provincial support programs to help people who've lost their businesses, to help them do retraining, to invest in education. So we got to do that. But number 5, I think, is the most interesting for our conversation. And it is, don't just be so defensive. Turn a shield into a sword. We're at a moment in time where the smartest and best people in the world, if they are researchers or scientists or doctors, don't want to go to the United States.
True, that's true.
So this is our huge opportunity for us to really go out there and say, come to Canada. And unfortunately, our province is not making it easy to be welcoming for these folks to come here.
And I appreciate what you're saying. Now you mentioned in case of Canada as such that Mr. Carney, whatever the 5 points that he mentioned, I think he seems fairly cognizant of the significance or importance of all those. And he's not talking for the sake of talking. And the fact that he's not talking loudly like most people tend to, that means he's a thinker, he's a strategist person as such. And I think when it comes down to the question of helping people who are getting hurt, we have had a very good experience during the COVID days.
Yes.
Okay, and COVID was a much greater, I should say, tragedy or a challenge
Threat, yeah.
than the present situation appears to be providing. And I think, don't you think that we as Canadians, as Albertans, should be comfortable or happy with the way the federal government and our Prime Minister is dealing with the situation? The question is now getting Alberta on board, being effective part of Team Canada, as opposed to trying to or appearing to
Undermine.
stay out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, because I'm in the job I'm in, I have to be a little bit skeptical,
Okay.
just to make sure that everything is underway. But that's why I'm hoping to spend some time with the Prime Minister and some of his senior ministers next week. I'm the leader of the opposition. Well, technically, I'm not the leader of the opposition because I'm not yet elected. But I am the leader of the opposition party in Alberta. Normally, you wouldn't go meet with the Prime Minister in those roles.
True.
But I am lucky because I've had such a long career. I know all these folks and all the parties. So I'm hoping to really sit down and get a better understanding of what's going on behind the curtain in Ottawa. But you're exactly right. I think that when we're speaking outwardly, we have to show this common front. And look, occasionally in a common front, you script it that one person will go off and be the good cop and one person will go off and be the bad cop. But as long as it's part of a proper strategy, that's fine. What I'm not seeing is the government of Alberta and the province of Alberta being part of that common strategy.
It's rather sad that your observation, your feeling as such that one of the members is not on board. But I personally feel that opposition is the one that keeps the governments on track, keeps them effective, and keeps them doing what they have promised to do. And I wish you all the best, and I hope that you are more successful than some other people have been.
Well, thank you. You know, my goal is to be premier, but there's a while there. But I should let people know, because this is confusing, that there are these 3 by-elections going on right away. The election day is Monday, June 23rd, just a couple weeks from now.
Okay.
And so if you live in Edmonton Strathcona, south side of the river, if you live in Edmonton Ellerslie, as I imagine many of your viewers will,
Yes.
that's the southeast corner of the city, Laurel, Summerside, those areas, then you have a chance to vote. And this is a really good opportunity to send that message to Danielle Smith that, look, these are things we're concerned about and we need you to do better. The government isn't going to change as a result of these by-elections, but we have the chance to send that message. And we've got a terrific candidate in Edmonton Ellerslie who your viewers will probably be familiar with because he's a longtime journalist, Gurtej Singh Brar. And so I'm spending a lot of time with Gurtej Singh in the community, talking to people about their concerns. So hopefully we'll see you all on the streets in Ellerslie, but I want to encourage everyone, regardless of your own politics, make sure you vote in that by-election.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Nanshi.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure speaking with
It's
you.
great
And
to
wish
meet
you all
you.
the best.
Thank you so much.
And to your party.
What a beautiful conversation. I hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Would love to.
Thank you.
Thank you very
and
much.
thank you.
You're welcome.
ਸਾਡਾ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵੇਖਣ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਨ ਲਈ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ ਚੈਨਲ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਤੇ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਬਟਨ ਤੇ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰੋ।